The wind coming off the Pacific had that sharp, briny bite you only get in early autumn along the Oregon coast. I was standing on my porch watching the gulls cut across the grey sky when I felt a small tug at my sleeve. I looked down to find my 9-year-old granddaughter Sophie standing there in her favourite yellow raincoat, her eyes darting nervously toward the yard, as if she didn't want anyone else to see her talking to me. "Grandpa," she whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "Tonight, Mom and Dad are going to take away your house and your money." For a second, the air seemed to thicken around me. My grip tightened on the chipped coffee mug in my hand. Sophie's words didn't come out like a child's harmless exaggeration. They came out like a fact she had carried on her small shoulders for hours. I crouched so we were eye level. "Sophie, what do you mean?" I kept my voice calm even though I could feel my pulse quicken. She glanced toward the kitchen window where, inside, my son Ryan and his wife Vanessa were talking with neighbors, smiling and gesturing like perfect hosts. Then Sophie leaned closer, her raincoat rustling softly. "I heard them last night," she said. "They were in the kitchen. Mom told Dad you're too old to live here by yourself, and Dad said something about papers from the bank. Mom said it'll be too late for you to stop it." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't leave mine. I could see the courage it took for her to tell me. "Did they say anything else?" I asked. She bit her lip, nodding. Dad asked, "What if he finds out?" And Mom said, "By then it'll be done." A cold, steady anger began to settle in my chest. I had spent decades building this home with my own hands, weathering storms and repairs, raising my son in these very rooms. And now they wanted to sweep it out from under me like I was some stranger on their path to an easier life. I placed my hands gently on Sophie's shoulders. "You did the right thing telling me, but for now it stays between us. Can you do that?" Her chin wobbled. "Will you still love me if they get mad?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing they do could ever change how much I love you. Not ever." She nodded, but I could feel the weight she was carrying. I told her to go back inside, help her mum with the party, and pretend nothing had happened. She gave me one last glance before skipping toward the door, her yellow coat a small flash of light against the overcast sky. From the porch, I watched Ryan pouring drinks for guests, Vanessa's hand resting on his arm as she scanned the property the way a realtor sizes up a house before a sale. They looked relaxed, confident, unaware that the foundation of their plan had just cracked. The ocean stretched beyond the dunes, calm for now, but I'd lived long enough to know how quickly that could change. Inside, I set my mug down and pulled open the drawer where I kept my yellow legal pads, the same kind I'd used for every construction plan, budget and serious decision of my life. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote the date and 3 words in block letters: papers from bank. Vanessa's short career in finance had been enough to make her dangerous in the wrong circumstances. I'd seen men lose everything not to strangers but to people they trusted, and I wasn't about to join their ranks. If they wanted to play this game, they were about to find out I'd been building my defenses long before they even thought to attack. The morning had started innocently enough. A pot of coffee, the steady hum of the kettle, and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. At 72, I had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of my days, each one anchored by the same simple comforts. But Ryan's voice over the phone had been the first sign something was shifting beneath the surface. "Dad, we think you should come early to Sophie's party today," he'd said, his tone unnaturally practiced. "Maybe around 1:30. We've got some family stuff to talk through before the guests get here." Family stuff. The phrase landed like a loose nail on a finished deck, out of place, suspicious. Ryan had never used it before, not since Evelyn passed 3 years ago. I had kept my own tone light. "I've never missed one of Sophie's birthdays, but all right, I'll be there." The call ended, but the unease remained, sitting in the room like an unwelcome guest. And now, after Sophie's whispered warning, the shape of that unease was beginning to show its edges. By noon, the yard was dotted with cars, and the smell of frosted cupcakes drifted through the air. I spotted Helen Price, my next-door neighbor and a retired bank officer, walking up the path with a casserole dish in hand. She greeted me warmly, but her voice dropped as she leaned closer. "Walter," she murmured, "2 days ago I saw Ryan and Vanessa coming out of the bank downtown. They had a thick stack of papers, looked official. They were in a hurry." I didn't let my expression change. "Appreciate you telling me, Helen." As she stepped inside to greet Sophie, I filed her words next to Sophie's warning, the 2 pieces sliding into place like they'd been cut to fit. At exactly 1:30, I arrived at Ryan's house. Vanessa greeted me at the door with a smile too bright, her fingers lingering on my arm a beat too long. "Walter, you look wonderful," she said, her voice like polished glass. Ryan appeared behind her, clapping me on the shoulder. "Perfect timing, Dad. Let's get you settled before everyone shows up." Before they could usher me anywhere, Sophie bounded over, her smile genuine and unpracticed. She hugged me tight, and for a moment, the tension eased. I handed her the wrapped art set I'd brought and watched her eyes light up. Then I noticed Vanessa watching us from across the room, her gaze sharpening before she turned to greet another guest. The living room was dressed for the occasion, streamers, balloons, neatly arranged platters of food, but underneath the festive colors, I could sense the choreography. Ryan and Vanessa moved through the crowd like they were working a room, intercepting conversations, steering me towards certain people. I played my part, smiling, making small talk, but noting every exchange between them. The day moved with deliberate slowness, the tension coiled tight beneath the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. By the time the last of Sophie's friends had been picked up, the sky outside had shifted to the dim orange of a fading sunset. Ryan caught my eye. "Dad, why don't you stay a little after? We can go over that family stuff we mentioned." Vanessa's voice slid in smoothly. "It'll just take a few minutes. We've been working on something that will make life easier for you." I gave them a small nod, masking the fact that I already had my own plan forming, a plan that would require perfect timing, a few trusted allies, and the patience to let them think they were still in control. What they didn't know was that tonight, the game they were preparing to play would quietly become mine. The last of the paper plates had been stacked in the trash, and Sophie had been sent upstairs with a slice of cake for later. The house was quiet now, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I followed Ryan and Vanessa into the dining room, noting immediately that it was the only spot in the house without a view of the ocean. No distractions, just a flat surface and enough space for papers. Vanessa's leather tote sat neatly beside her chair, the strap looped just so, like she had rehearsed even this. She sat down across from me, her back straight but her posture relaxed, too relaxed. That was the body language of someone convinced they were about to win. "We've been thinking about the future," she began, folding her hands together as if she were offering a gift. "Making sure you don't have to worry about the little things, bills, errands, bank visits." Ryan slid into the seat next to her, nodding in rhythm with her words. "It's just about helping you, Dad, taking some of the weight off your shoulders." I let my gaze drop to the tote. Vanessa caught the glance, and without missing a beat in her sentence, reached inside. A moment later, she set a slim, sand-colored folder on the table, turning it so it faced me. My fingers recognized the texture before my mind did. Heavy stock paper, the kind law firms use when they want a document to feel permanent. The top page was marked with a yellow sticky tab over the signature line. The heading read in bold, "Durable Power of Attorney." Ryan smiled the way a salesman does when he's certain the customer is already sold. "This just means we can handle things on your behalf if something comes up. You'd still be in control. This is just a backup." That word "just" was one I'd heard in far too many negotiations. It was the sugar they used to coat the hook. Vanessa reached into the folder again and produced another document. The title made my chest tighten. "Transfer on Death Deed. It's only a precaution," she said, as casually as if she were recommending I buy an extra flashlight. "If something happened, the house would go directly to the family. No probate, no legal delays. You could still live here as long as you wanted." I traced the edge of the paper without looking down. "And you've already filled these out?" "Just the basics," she replied smoothly. "Names, addresses. All that's missing is your signature and a notary stamp. We can get that first thing tomorrow morning." Ryan jumped in quickly. "It's better to do it now, Dad. Tomorrow the bank's open half a day. We could have it done and out of the way." I studied his face. The eagerness there wasn't about helping me. It was about securing something before the weekend ended. "What brought this on so suddenly?" I asked, keeping my tone curious, not confrontational. Ryan hesitated just long enough to glance at Vanessa before answering. "We've been talking about it for months, especially after the storms last winter. The repairs, the upkeep. You've got a lot to manage here." Vanessa leaned forward, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a secret. "We saw what happened to Mrs. Donnelly down the street when she fell. No paperwork, and her kids had to fight the bank to pay her bills. We don't want that for you. It was a neat story, plausible and sympathetic, but I knew the truth. Mrs. Donnelly's fall had been minor, and she'd handled her own affairs without a single issue. "I appreciate your concern," I said, meaning it in the narrowest possible way. Vanessa slid a pen toward me. "If we do this now, we can avoid a lot of headaches later." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in the hallway. Sophie, peeking from behind the door frame, her small hand clutching the wood. Our eyes met for the briefest second. I gave her the smallest nod. She stayed put. I picked up the pen, turning it slowly between my fingers. "You've already spoken to someone at the bank." Ryan nodded. "We've got the account set up for joint access once this is signed. Makes it easier for us to pay things on your behalf." That was the tell. Joint access was the first step to merging funds, and merging funds was the first step to draining them. "And the house?" I asked. Vanessa didn't blink. "The deed would make it easier to transition things, if needed. You'd be listed as the life tenant. You'd keep living there until..." She trailed off, leaving the silence to finish her thought. "Until I decide otherwise," Ryan added a little too quickly. They were tightening their pacing, pushing me from question to signature before I could think, which told me they were afraid I might think. I set the pen down. "I don't sign anything without reading every line." Vanessa smiled, but her eyes had cooled. "Of course, take your time." She pushed the folder a few inches closer. I opened it, scanning slowly. The sweeping powers in my best interest, the clauses that allowed for property sales without my approval, and hidden deeper, the ability to refinance without my consent. "This is thorough," I said evenly. "We wanted to cover all bases," Ryan replied. "I'm sure Helen would be willing to look this over," I said, my voice as casual as theirs. "She knows more about these things than I do." Vanessa's smile tightened. "That's not necessary. We already had someone review it. Then it should stand up to a second opinion," I replied. Ryan's jaw twitched, the first crack in his composure. "Dad, we're trying to help you, and I'm trying to make sure we all sleep well tonight," I said. I slid the folder back toward them. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. with witnesses." For a moment neither of them spoke. Vanessa leaned back, feigning ease. "All right, tomorrow." But I could see it in Ryan's eyes. They'd been counting on tonight. By the time I left Ryan's house that evening, the last light over the ocean had turned the horizon into a muted band of gold fading into deep blue. The sand-colored folder was still in my hands, not signed, but heavier than it looked. Paper always weighs more when it carries intent. The road back to my house wound along the cliffs, the Pacific stretching out on my right like a vast silent witness. My mind wasn't on the view. It was already mapping out the next day, step by step. The way I used to plan a build, measure twice, cut once, and leave nothing to chance. Inside, the house greeted me with the familiar scent of cedar and the faint creak of old wood settling into the night. I set the folder on the oak table in the kitchen, flipped on the lamp, and pulled one of my yellow legal pads from the drawer. At the top I wrote the time, 8:41 p.m. Then I began the list. Ruinisum, witnesses, legal counsel, proof of pattern. Room layout. My voice, I didn't need to raise it. I needed to use it. The first call went to Helen Price. "Helen, I need you here tomorrow at 10 sharp, I said. "Bring your niece, the one with the notary stamp. Please reply yes if you can." The second call went to David Ross, an old friend who had sat across from more conference tables than I could count. "David, urgent matter. Bring your eyes and your presence. 10 a.m. tomorrow at my place. Coffee will be ready." Helen replied within a minute. "Yes, no questions." David took longer, as he always did, not because he was slow, but because he thought twice before he sent anything. His answer came through. "I'll be there. Do not sign a thing. Let them bring it to you." I set the phone down and opened the folder again, going page by page. Durable power of attorney, transfer on death deed. And tucked between them, a third document I hadn't noticed before. Third-party authorization for my insurance, granting someone else full access to inquire about and modify my policies. Vanessa had thought about everything: utilities, coverage, the small moving parts you don't notice until someone else controls them. The more thorough their trap, the cleaner it would look when I sprung it back. From my office closet I pulled out the old metal lockbox and turned the key. Inside were ledgers I'd kept for years, records of every loan, every bill I'd paid on Ryan's behalf, car repairs, tuition gaps, home insurance, taxes, 74 entries in total, each one noted in dark ink with dates and amounts. Up close, it looked like generosity. From a distance, it was a pattern, a history of responsibility on my part that would be hard to challenge. I laid the ledger open on the table next to last year's property tax receipt and the original deed to the house. Proof of ownership, proof of stability, proof I wasn't the man they'd try to paint me as tomorrow. Then I reached for a small digital recorder I used back when my hands were too dusty for a pen on job sites. I didn't need a secret recording to win. I needed a record of what was said, word for word, in case they tried to twist it later. Finally, I took a long look around the kitchen. I would control the environment as much as the conversation. My chair would be with the light at my back. Helen and Lauren near the door. Ryan and Vanessa across from me, where their body language could be read in full view of everyone. The house was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I touched the edge of the oak table, the grain worn smooth by decades of Sunday breakfasts and quiet evenings. Evelyn's voice came back to me, steady, certain. Don't let fear make you small. By the time I turned off the kitchen light, the plan was set. Tomorrow, the game they thought they were playing would take place on my terms, in my house, with my witnesses. The morning came in with a pale, cold light that turned the ocean mist silver. I was up before the alarm, moving through the house in the slow, deliberate way of a man who knows exactly what needs to be done. My blue shirt, the one Evelyn always said made me look ready for business, was ironed and laid out on the chair. By 9:30, the oak table was set exactly as I'd pictured it the night before. My chair was at the head, the light behind me. 2 chairs across from me for Ryan and Vanessa. Helen and her niece Lauren would sit to my right, near the door. The ledger, property tax receipts and deed lay neatly in the center, next to the folder they had given me. The digital recorder was already running, small and unassuming. At 9:44, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Helen stepped inside first, carrying her ever-present thermos, followed by Lauren, her notary journal tucked under one arm. "You look steady," Helen said with a knowing glance. "That's the idea," I replied. 2 minutes later, David Ross arrived. No small talk, just a handshake and a slow survey of the room. "Layout's perfect," he murmured. "Let them bring the weather. They'll find the ground already dry." By 9:59, the air in the house had shifted. It wasn't tense yet, but it was close, like the faint static before a lightning strike. The clock ticked to 10, and right on cue, a car door slammed. Then another. Vanessa's perfume reached the doorway 2 seconds before she did, followed closely by Ryan. Ryan spotted David immediately, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. Vanessa, on the other hand, didn't miss a step. She smiled like this was all part of her plan. "Oh," she said, feigning pleasant surprise, "you invited company." "You brought company," I replied evenly, nodding toward the folder in her arm. I thought it was fair. Ryan's mouth tightened. "We didn't think lawyers were necessary for family." "I'm a friend," David said from his seat, "and family is where people deserve the best paperwork." Vanessa pulled out the folder and set it on the table, aligning it perfectly with the table's edge. Her movements were precise, controlled. "Let's begin," she said. Ryan slid the first page toward me, the durable power of attorney, smiling like he was offering a gift. "This is just a precaution, Dad. You'd still have full control while you're healthy. It's simply insurance." "Is there anything here," I asked, "that transfers control of my property without my express consent?" "No," Ryan said instantly, too instantly. David reached over, flipped the page, and tapped a section I'd circled the night before. "Emergency determination. This clause lets you act immediately if you believe there's an emergency, even if Walter hasn't agreed. That's not insurance. That's access." For the first time, Vanessa's smile wavered. "It's precautionary," she said. "If I fall ill," I replied, "I'll call a doctor, not a bank." I let the silence after that hang in the air until Ryan shifted in his seat. Then I picked up the second document, the transfer on death deed. "This one," I said, "changes the title of the house the moment I die. Straight to you. No probate. Convenient, isn't it?" "It saves money," Vanessa said quickly. "I had an advisor," I said. "She wore a red raincoat and laughed at storms. She never added riders without consent." Ryan leaned forward. "Dad, we're just trying to protect the family." "Protect," I said, "by drafting a care plan that says I'm confused at dusk, that I misplace my keys." The color drained slightly from Ryan's face. He knew I'd read the hidden page. Helen leaned in subtly, as if not to miss a word. David broke the pause. "Walter, do you consent to signing any of the documents presented today?" "No," I said, steady and clear. "Do you wish to make any statement about your ability to manage your affairs?" "Yes, I am fully competent. I have a documented history of supporting my son financially, and I am altering my estate to protect my granddaughter." Lauren wrote down every word in her notary journal. Then I signed beneath it, my name in thick ink, a line they couldn't erase. Vanessa's voice cooled. "You'll regret this." Not as much as you will, I replied. The room was still. Outside, the sound of waves carried faintly through the air, steady and unbothered. When the door closed behind Ryan and Vanessa, the house seemed to exhale. Helen rested a hand on my shoulder as she left, Lauren packing away her notary journal, and David giving me a small nod before stepping out into the cool salt air. "You didn't need us," David said quietly, "but you were smart enough to have us here." Once they were gone, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, my fingers resting on the edge of the oak table. Outside, the ocean moved with its usual rhythm, steady and patient, like it had all the time in the world. I didn't. I gathered the folder they had brought and slid it into a plain manila envelope. It wasn't courtroom evidence yet, but it was a record, a tangible piece of their intent. And records had a way of outlasting lies. I tucked it into a drawer Evelyn once used for birthday cards, a place Ryan and Vanessa would never think to look because it held nothing of financial value. The next step was to make sure their path forward would be as steep as possible. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, not because I needed it, but because the act of stirring in the cream gave my hands something steady to do while my mind sorted the order of things. First, I called the bank and asked for Arthur Bennett, the branch VP I'd done work for years ago. "Arthur," I said when he picked up, "I need protections in place. Any withdrawals over 1,000 require my signature and ID, no exceptions. You'll have it before the day's out," he assured me. "And the house, flag any title inquiries as high priority. If someone tries to transfer without me, I want it on your desk first." Next, I went to the county recorder's office. The woman at the counter recognized me from the accessibility ramp I'd built for their back entrance years back. "What brings you in, Walter?" she asked. "Need to make sure my title stays exactly where it is." She pulled up the records, her eyes narrowing as she clicked through the screens. "I'll put a monitoring flag on it. You'll get an alert for any activity." From there, I drove straight to my attorney's office. Mark Atwood was a man who didn't waste words, which is why I trusted him. "I want to update my will," I told him, "and add a clause that makes any attempt to challenge it grounds for disinheritance. I also want a trust for Sophie. Ironclad, unreachable by her parents, until she's of age." Mark nodded slowly. "Enforceable, and you're sure?" "I'm sure." We set the appointment for Friday morning, giving me 2 days to gather every shred of proof. On the drive home, I could feel the plan hardening into place. By the time the rain began that evening, I was back at the oak table, scanning old files and taking photographs of each page. 2 flash drives, one in the safe, one in the glove box of my truck. I drafted a short statement declaring my capacity, my decisions and my intentions, and Helen agreed to witness it the following morning. Just before bed, I called Sophie. Her voice was small, careful. "Did they talk to you today?" I asked. "No," she said. "Mum was mad, but she didn't say why." "Good. If she does, you don't have to answer. Just tell her you don't know anything." There was a pause. "Are you mad at me?" "Never." I said. "You did the right thing." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "The heron doesn't mind standing still." I smiled faintly in the dark. "That's right. Sometimes still is strong." I hung up knowing that the stillness wouldn't last. People like Ryan and Vanessa didn't let go. They regrouped. And when they came back, I intended to be ready. The next morning, before I could even finish my coffee, a white envelope slid through my mail slot. No stamp. My name written in Ryan's quick, slanted handwriting. Inside was a single sheet. "We've arranged for Dr. James Whitmore to visit tomorrow at 2 p.m. for an evaluation. Please be home." No signature, no explanation, just their next move. I read it once, set it down beside my coffee, and let the silence stretch. So, this was where they were going, a competency exam on their terms with their doctor. They were hoping to lay the groundwork for a legal grab, claiming I couldn't handle my own affairs. I dialed Mark Atwood. "Change of plan," I said. "Can you be here tomorrow at 1:30? Bring someone who can run a legitimate capacity assessment, someone they can't accuse of bias." "I already know who," Mark replied. "Dr. Evelyn Carter. Board-certified in geriatric medicine, published on capacity evaluations, and allergic to cutting corners. She'll be there." "Good," I said. "They're expecting Whitmore. Let's disappoint them." The rest of the day, I kept my hands busy. I swept the front steps, tightened the latch on the back gate, walked the perimeter of the property. Not because it mattered to the case, but because it mattered to me. This was still my home. Every hinge, every nail, every groove in the wood carried the weight of years Evelyn and I had put into it. When I called Helen later that evening, she didn't hesitate. Lauren and I will be there at 1:15. David too? Yes, I said. I want them to walk in and see the room already set. Light at my back, witnesses by the door, the folder in plain sight. That night, the ocean was loud against the cliffs, the kind of restless sound that fills the house even with the windows shut. I lay awake listening to it, knowing tomorrow would be another test. But I had been tested before. This one, at least, I could prepare for. By the next afternoon, everything was in place. Helen and Lauren arrived first, thermos and notary journal in hand. David came minutes later, his eyes sweeping the layout with an approving nod. At 1:58, tires crunched on the gravel drive. Vanessa's heels struck the porch first, followed by Ryan, and between them, a tall man in his 50s with a leather briefcase. Dr. Whitmore, I assumed. He carried the air of someone who had already decided the conclusion. Before they could cross the threshold, a silver sedan rolled up behind them. Mark stepped out, followed by Dr. Carter, her navy coat crisp against the wind. Her posture was clean, precise, the kind of presence that made people straighten in their chairs. "This is Dr. Carter," Mark said as they approached the door. Ryan's smile faltered. "We already have a doctor." "So do I replied. "And since it's my capacity being evaluated, both will be present. That way there's no dispute." Whitmore's eyes narrowed, but he stepped inside without comment. Dr. Carter followed, setting her bag down neatly next to my chair. Vanessa's voice carried that sweet edge she used when she thought she still held control. "Walter, this feels unnecessary." "Then it shouldn't be a problem," I said, gesturing to the chairs. We began. Whitmore went first. Name, date, current events, the kind of shallow questions meant to skim the surface. I answered each with calm precision, as if I were naming tools in a workshop I'd used my whole life. Then Dr. Carter took over, moving deeper. Financial decisions I'd made in the last year, why I'd made them, hypothetical scenarios about property and consent. I answered everyone with detail, dates and amounts from memory. By the time she closed her notebook, the room was quiet enough to hear the ocean outside. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Carter said, "Mr. Grayson is fully capable of managing his affairs. I see no cognitive impairment that would justify a transfer of control." Whitmore cleared his throat. "I'd like to reserve my judgment." "Of course," Carter replied smoothly, "but my report will include the presence of witnesses and notarized documentation of today's proceedings." That was the lightning strike I'd been waiting for. Ryan's shoulders stiffened. Vanessa's smile was gone. I slid their folder toward them. "You can take your documents back. I won't be signing anything today, or any other day, unless it's on my terms and my time." Ryan tried one last line. "We were just trying to help you." "Help," I said evenly. "Looks different when it comes with a pen in your hand and a clock on the table." They left without another word. The door closed, and the sound of the waves seemed calmer than they had all day. For the next few days, the phone stayed silent. No calls from Ryan, no sudden visits from Vanessa. Even Sophie's number, saved in my favorites, showed no new messages. At first, I thought maybe they were regrouping, licking their wounds after the failed competency ambush. By the fourth day, I knew better. I tried calling Sophie that morning, once, twice, then a third time. Each time the call went straight to voicemail. I sent a short text, "Hope you're doing well. Call me when you can." No reply. At noon I drove into town to run errands. When I passed the elementary school, I spotted Sophie's class on the playground. She was at the swings, scanning the fence line like she was waiting for something or someone. But when she saw me, her expression shifted from hopeful to guarded. A woman in a bright blue vest, one of the recess aides, moved quickly toward her, speaking low and firm. Sophie's eyes dropped to the ground. The aide glanced in my direction, shook her head, and steered Sophie toward the other side of the yard. That's when it clicked. Ryan and Vanessa hadn't just gone silent. They'd cut me off. No calls, no visits, and from the look of it, no unsupervised contact at school either. I drove home without stopping for the groceries I'd meant to buy. The house felt colder when I walked in, the sound of the waves muted against the wind. I sat at the oak table, staring at the yellow legal pad I kept there. In block letters I wrote, "Denial of access." This was no longer just about property. This was about control. They were trying to pressure me by keeping Sophie away, hoping the isolation would wear me down. But if they thought that would make me fold, they didn't know me half as well as they believed. I called Mark Atwood first. "They've blocked contact with Sophie," I said. "I need the process for securing legal visitation rights for grandparents in this state." Mark's voice was steady. I'll have the paperwork ready in an hour. You'll need to document every attempt you've made to see her. Times, dates, responses, or lack of them. Next, I called Helen. I need you to write a statement about what you saw at the school last spring, when Sophie ran to me on the sidewalk and Vanessa pulled her away. Helen didn't hesitate. I'll type it up tonight. By the end of the day, I had 3 pages of notes and a copy of the letter Sophie had sent me for my birthday last month. Her handwriting, her words about the art set I'd given her, proof of a bond worth protecting. That night, I sat in the living room with the old photo albums, Sophie on my shoulders at the county fair, Sophie painting seashells on the porch, Sophie in the same yellow raincoat the day she whispered her warning to me. I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting for the right to be part of her life, and I intended to win both battles. By Monday morning, the sky was low and grey, the kind of coastal gloom that seemed to press down on the rooftops. I was at Mark Atwood's office by 8:30, the manila folder under my arm already thick with documents, dates, letters, photographs, and every piece of proof I'd gathered since this began. Mark had the paperwork ready when I walked in. "Petition for grandparent visitation," he said, tapping the stack. "And we're also filing a motion for temporary contact until the court date. That way they can't keep Sophie from you for months while this drags on." I nodded. "What do you need from me today?" "Sign here, here, and here," he said, sliding the pages across. "We'll have it served this week." Once the ink was dry, Mark leaned back. "Walter, I also think it's time we finalize the trust we talked about. If anything happens to you, Sophie's inheritance will bypass her parents entirely and be managed by an independent trustee until she turns 25. "That's exactly what I want," I said. "Put the house in there, the savings, everything. Make it untouchable." Mark gave a small smile. "It'll be ironclad. They can challenge it if they want, but it'll cost them more than they'd ever get." From there, we walked down the hall to meet with Dr. Carter. She was preparing her official report from the capacity evaluation, a crisp 2-page statement leaving no room for doubt. It outlined my clear understanding of my finances, my property, and my decisions, signed, dated, and notarized. "This," she said, handing me a copy, "is going to make it very hard for them to claim you need a guardian or power of attorney." By noon, I was back in my truck, the paperwork locked in a fireproof case on the passenger seat. I drove straight to the courthouse to file the visitation petition myself. The clerk stamped the date, August 14th, and gave me the case number. That little number, I knew, was the start of something they couldn't undo with a smile or a pen. The next stop was the bank. Arthur Bennett met me in his glass-walled office. "We've put every safeguard you asked for in place," he said. "Joint access removed, withdrawal limits enforced, and your accounts flagged for in-person ID only. If anyone tries anything without you here, it stops cold." "Good," I said. "Now let's talk about transferring my accounts into the trust as soon as it's finalized." We shook hands, and I left knowing that even if Ryan and Vanessa somehow got their hands on a piece of paper with my name on it, it wouldn't open a single door. That evening, as the sun broke briefly through the clouds, I sat at the oak table with my legal pad. I crossed off 3 items: petition filed, trust in progress. Bank locked down. There was still more to go, but the momentum had shifted. For the first time since Sophie whispered her warning, I wasn't just defending, I was moving forward. I thought about Ryan and Vanessa opening their mail in a few days, finding the court summons with their names printed in bold. I wondered if they'd see it as the warning it truly was, because I wasn't stopping. Not now, not ever. The summons went out on a Wednesday. By Friday morning I had my answer. It came not in the form of a phone call or a letter, but in the sound of a car engine revving hard in my driveway. When I stepped to the porch, Ryan was already halfway up the steps, his face set in a grim mask. Vanessa trailed just behind, sunglasses hiding her eyes despite the overcast sky. "You went to court?" Ryan demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut the air. "I filed for my rights," I said evenly. "Something you and Vanessa have been working so hard to take away." Vanessa's voice was low, dangerous. "You think this is going to make things better for Sophie? Dragging her into some legal circus. What drags her into this," I replied, "is you keeping her from her grandfather to try to force my hand." Ryan stepped closer, his shadow crossing the threshold. "You could have just signed the papers, Dad. None of this would be happening." "Exactly," I said. "None of this," meaning I'd have lost my house, my accounts, and eventually Sophie. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You're twisting this. We were trying to make things simpler for everyone." I let the silence stretch long enough for the waves outside to fill it. "Simplicity," I said, "isn't worth the cost of everything I've built." For a moment, Ryan's gaze darted toward the living room where the lockbox sat on the side table, still in plain sight from earlier. I followed his eyes deliberately, making sure he knew I'd noticed. "From here on out," I said, "you don't come to this house without calling first. You don't bring anyone with you, and you don't speak to me about my finances. If you break that rule, I'll have you trespassed." Ryan's mouth opened like he was about to fire back, but Vanessa's hand on his arm stopped him. "Let's go," she said. "We'll handle this another way." They turned, walking back to the car with the stiff precision of people trying not to look like they'd lost. I stayed on the porch until the engine faded down the road, the mist swallowing the sound. Inside, I sat at the oak table and added a new line to my legal pad: security cameras, front and back. If they were going to start testing boundaries, I wanted the footage. That afternoon, I drove into town and bought a pair of high-definition units with motion alerts. By nightfall, they were installed, connected, and sending real-time updates to my phone. The first clip came through before midnight, just a stray cat nosing around the porch, but it proved the system worked. In bed, I thought about the way Ryan had looked at the lockbox, not with curiosity, but with calculation. They weren't done. The court date would only be one front in this fight, and they'd be looking for openings anywhere they could find them. I'd drawn my line in the sand. Now I had to hold it. The first sign came from Helen. She showed up at my door one Tuesday afternoon, cheeks flushed from the walkover. "I was at the post office," she said, "and I overheard Vanessa talking to Mrs. Leland. You know, the one who runs the PTA. She was telling her you've been having trouble keeping track of things, and that Sophie's been worried about you. It was the oldest trick in the book, planting seeds in a small town. Once they took root, they spread without needing water." That same day, I got a call from Sophie's art teacher. "Mr. Grayson, Sophie's been quiet lately," she said. "Her mother told me there's been some tension at home involving you. I thought you should know. They weren't just cutting me off from Sophie. They were trying to rewrite the story before the court date." I thanked the teacher for her concern and hung up, then immediately started another page on my legal pad: reputation defense. I wrote down every instance, every person, and every word that had been relayed to me. Small-town gossip could feel harmless, but in front of a judge, a documented pattern of slander became evidence. That evening, I called David Ross. "They're running a whisper campaign," I said. "Expected," he replied. "They're trying to make it seem like keeping you from Sophie is protecting her. The more you stay calm, the more their story will unravel when it's tested." Still, calm didn't mean idle. I scheduled a meeting with Mark to prepare sworn statements from Helen and anyone else willing to confirm what they'd heard. I also asked Dr. Carter if she'd be willing to testify about her evaluation. She agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, I caught a break. I was leaving the grocery store when I saw Sophie's class lining up for a field trip bus. She spotted me instantly, her eyes lighting up before she remembered herself, and glanced toward the teacher. I stepped forward just enough for her to hear me over the chatter. "Hey, kiddo," I said softly. "I'm thinking of you." Her smile was quick, almost hidden, but it was there. "Me too," she whispered back before the line moved on. It was a small moment, but it told me she hadn't believed whatever her parents were telling her. The bond was still there, frayed, maybe, but intact. Back home, I added it to my notes. Sophie still responsive, school contact observed. The next day, a cousin I hadn't heard from in months called out of the blue. "Walter," he said, "Ryan's been calling around saying you're getting paranoid, asking if anyone's noticed you slipping." I thanked him, made another note, and realized something important. They were casting the net wider, which meant they were burning through goodwill. In a town like ours, once people started sensing manipulation, loyalty shifted fast. By the end of the week, I had 5 sworn statements in Mark's file and a list of more witnesses to approach. Ryan and Vanessa wanted to play the pressure game. I was happy to keep score, because every whisper they sent out came back to me eventually, and when it did, it became one more brick in the wall I was building against them. By the start of the next week, the wind had shifted, not in the air but in the way people around town looked at me. The grocery clerk, who'd been politely distant for weeks, suddenly asked if I'd be coming to the fall festival. The man at the hardware store offered to carry my paint cans out to the truck without me asking. Word was getting around, and not the version Ryan and Vanessa had been working so hard to spread. Helen stopped by with a grin. "You'll like this one," she said. I heard Mrs. Leland asking Vanessa about Sophie's school art show, and Vanessa snapped at her, said she was tired of everyone asking about Walter. I smiled faintly. That was the kind of slip people noticed. If Vanessa was losing her composure in public, it meant the story they'd crafted wasn't holding as neatly as they'd planned. 2 days later, I got a call from Mark. Walter, one of the statements we filed just paid off. The judge approved temporary visitation until the hearing. First visits next Wednesday after school. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders felt lighter. Sophie knows? I asked. She will by tonight, Mark said. And Walter, Vanessa will know too. Expect some noise from their side. Noise was an understatement. The very next morning, my phone lit up with a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Vanessa's voice came through, sugary on the surface but laced with steel. I hope you're happy, Walter. Sophie's going to be confused, and when this is over, she'll know who made it worse. I didn't bother calling back. Instead, I forwarded the message to Mark for the case file. The weekend before the visit, I busied myself with repairs I'd been putting off, a loose hinge on the porch door, a fresh coat of varnish on the banister. It wasn't about the repairs themselves, it was about making the house feel ready for her again. On Sunday afternoon, I was in the yard trimming the hydrangeas when David pulled up. He leaned on the fence. You know, he said, in a fight like this, most people burn themselves out halfway. You're doing the opposite. That's the plan, I said. If they think time will wear me down, they'll have a long wait ahead of them. David's expression shifted. There's another thing. I heard Ryan was at the tavern last night, talking too loud. Said he might have to sell the boat to cover expenses. I raised an eyebrow. Legal fees? Probably. Whatever it is, it means they're feeling the strain. That night, I sat at the oak table and went through the trust paperwork again. The signatures were done, the accounts were in, and the title to the house was officially transferred into it. If Ryan or Vanessa thought they could still get their hands on it, they'd find nothing left to take. The next day, Helen called to say she'd seen Sophie at the library with her class. She looked happy, Helen said, kept glancing at the clock, like she was counting down to something. I knew exactly what. Wednesday was coming, and for the first time in this whole fight, the day ahead wasn't something they controlled. It was mine. The Wednesday sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The kind of crisp, late autumn day that made the air smell faintly of salt and wood smoke. I arrived at Sophie's school 10 minutes early, parking in the visitor's lot and walking to the front steps with the steady calm I'd been practicing for weeks. Through the glass doors, I could see her class lining up by the office. When Sophie spotted me, her face lit up in a way no court order could fabricate. She waved, then quickly tucked her hands behind her back as her teacher looked on. The release paperwork was simple. Sign here, show ID. And then Sophie was walking beside me toward the truck, her backpack bouncing with each step. I missed you, Grandpa, she said, her voice low but sure. I missed you too, kiddo, I replied. We've got the whole afternoon. We drove back to the house, the ocean to our left catching the sunlight in long silver streaks. Sophie told me about her art project, the books she'd been reading, and the new puppy one of her friends had just gotten. I let her talk, storing away every detail like it was gold. When we pulled into the driveway, she jumped out before I'd even cut the engine, running to the porch like she'd never been gone. It smells the same, she said when we stepped inside, like cookies and cedar. We spent the afternoon painting seashells, the same way we had the day she warned me about Ryan and Vanessa's plan. I made us grilled cheese for lunch, and she laughed when I burned the first sandwich, insisting it was extra crispy. Around 3, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My stomach tightened. Through the front window, I saw Ryan's SUV pulling in, Vanessa in the passenger seat. They're not supposed to be here, I said quietly. Sophie's smile faltered. Do I have to go? No, I said firmly. Not until the time's up. I stepped onto the porch as they got out. Ryan's eyes were already sharp. We thought we'd pick her up early, he said. That's not what the order says, I replied. You can come back at 5. Vanessa crossed her arms. This isn't good for her, Walter. She's confused. She didn't look confused a minute ago, I said, nodding toward the window where Sophie stood watching, her hand pressed to the glass. Ryan stepped forward. You really want to play this by the book? Yes, I said, and you should too, if you don't want to explain to a judge why you violated a court order. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Vanessa tugged at Ryan's sleeve. We'll be back, she said, her voice low but loaded. When their SUV disappeared down the road, I went back inside. Sophie had already returned to the table, her paintbrush poised over a shell. Everything okay? She asked. Everything's fine, I said, sitting beside her. We've still got 2 hours. And we did. 2 full hours of something they couldn't take from me, no matter how they tried. The court hearing was set for the following Tuesday. I arrived early, wearing the same blue shirt Evelyn had once said made me look ready to win. Mark was already there, reviewing his notes. Dr. Carter sat beside him, her calm presence a quiet anchor. Helen and David had taken seats in the gallery, ready to testify if needed. Ryan and Vanessa walked in 5 minutes before the start. They looked polished but tight, like they'd practiced their expressions in the car. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me only once, cold, sharp, and gone. The judge was a tall, silver-haired woman with a voice that filled the room without ever rising. "This is a hearing for grandparent visitation rights," she began, "and any related matters raised by the petitioner." Mark went first, laying out the timeline, Sophie's whispered warning, the sudden push for legal control, the competency exam, the cutoff. He presented Dr. Carter's report, the sworn statements from neighbors, and the voicemail from Vanessa. Each piece landed like another stone in a wall they couldn't climb. When it was their turn, Ryan tried to frame everything as concern for Dad's well-being, but under questioning, his explanations started to fray. The judge asked why, if they were so concerned, they'd moved to cut off contact with Sophie before any legal finding of incompetence. Ryan hesitated, glanced at Vanessa, and muttered something about confusing influences. Vanessa's testimony fared no better. When asked about the documents she'd brought to my house, she claimed they were just ideas. Mark slid copies of the forms across to the judge, pre-filled, notarized lines highlighted. By the time closing statements came, their case had holes big enough to drive a truck through. The judge didn't deliberate long. "Mr. Grayson retains full control of his property and finances," she said firmly. "Any further attempts to interfere without due cause will be considered harassment and subject to legal penalties. As for visitation, Mr. Grayson will have weekly time with his granddaughter, unsupervised, for a minimum of 4 hours, plus reasonable additional contact agreed upon by both parties." She turned to Ryan and Vanessa. "This court does not look kindly on coercive tactics against family. I suggest you reflect carefully on your conduct." When the gavel fell, it was like the air in the room shifted. I stood, shook Mark's hand, and met Dr. Carter's steady gaze with a nod of thanks. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Ryan and Vanessa passed me without a word. Their eyes told me everything. They knew the door they'd been pushing against had slammed shut for good. That Saturday, Sophie came over for our first court-ordered visit. We painted more seashells, baked cookies, and sat on the porch watching the ocean. She leaned her head against my arm. "You won," she said softly. I smiled at the horizon. "We did, kiddo, we did." The waves rolled in steady, unbothered, like they had through every storm, and for the first time in months, I felt the same.